Hello, and welcome to another episode of Solipsist Watched. I'm your host, the Social Solipsist, and this week I watched Amsterdam from 2022. I'm not entirely sure how to talk about this film because it sort of defies all sense, which is a nonsense statement on its own, but it is a movie about many things and nothing all at the same time. And a movie that can't ever seem to find its footing, despite clearly having a lot of good footing around it. I'll avoid torturing this metaphor too much longer. It's a period piece about a couple of characters in the era after the First World War, and it seems to be in the first portion of the film to be a character study of sorts, and a historical fiction about a certain group of people, a certain set of kinds of people in and following the aftermath of the Great War, and especially in the US, the way that affected politics and economics and social norms and all these different things. This movie has a lot of ideas, and it tries to deliver all of them and ends up kind of delivering none. Now, I'm not going to say that there's no reason to watch this film, because there are a lot of good things about it. But it is undeniably vastly less than the sum of its parts. This is written and directed by David O. Russell, who is a rather notable / infamous director and writer. I've watched a few of his films over the years. Not the biggest fan of any of the ones I can recall. And as writer and director on this, I'm gonna basically hold him responsible for most of it, most of what's wrong with it, and say that most of what's actually successful is down to the actors. Maybe some of the direction. It's always a little bit of a question how much of like the quality of a performance is actor versus director, or director assisted. But this has a pretty star-studded cast. Some faces who have been around quite a long time, from Robert De Niro and Christian Bale, to some newer faces, John David Washington, who I think I've mentioned before, and a few others who are sort of in between. It's a pretty ensemble cast, and all of the major players are played by actors of some note. And most of them put on very good performances with what they have to work with. Like I said, the cast is pretty. It's a pretty extensive list. The one that sticks out, and I can't remember what else I've actually seen her in that she was also bad in, but Taylor Swift is in the movie briefly, and she's not very good. It's no surprise. And frankly, her inclusion does sort of sully the whole thing, because normally I might say, this just happens to be a star-studded cast and everybody put on a really good performance. So it's just happens to be star-studded because these are the people who were right for the role, and they're all really great. Her inclusion makes it feel more like this was a deliberate attempt to get attention pointed at the film based on its cast list, which is unfortunate. it's also sort of an early warning sign of what's about to go on in the film, which is basically nothing for the first 2/3 of the film. Structurally, it's a disaster. It looks like it's about to be a character study of these three characters, Christian Bale, Margot Robbie, and John David Washington. And then it evolves into like, then it sort of like, it throws you some hints early on. It's like, is this a mystery? Is it a whodunit? Is it a character study? Is it a historical recreation thing? Is it what exactly is it going to be? And it never settles on any of them, or rather, it settles briefly and then like flits off and does something else for a while. But that's all really. That's all of the tonal problems and structural problems there are really made all the worse by the realization that about an hour and 20 minutes into it, and this is a long film too, an hour and 20 minutes, and you realize nothing's really happened, and you're looking like, I was thinking it before, but like we hit this point where it's suddenly like an hour and 20, hour and 30 minutes in, there's suddenly a sign of a plot, and you're going, what the fuck? You can't introduce a plot right now. This isn't where you introduce the plot. This should have happened 20 minutes into the film, not an hour and 20 minutes in. And it's just bizarre because it seems to be trying to, it acts as though, oh, those first hour and 20 minutes were set up for what we're about to do for the next 50 minutes. But in reality, no, not really. So it's just all over the place. The script is likewise, unsurprisingly, a disaster as a result, because if you've got that much of a structural problem, it's probably because the script itself is just meandering all over the place. Excuse me just a second. And so the writing is all over the place in terms of its tone. It's not really leading any particular place, and that's what really led me in the from about 20 minutes in to about 80 minutes in to think, oh, this is like a weird wannabe artsy character study. And it's just these characters saying like somewhat sensical, somewhat nonsensical phrases and things to each other, and they're all kind of weirdos, and it sort of kind of works until you're like dragged back into reality and you're like, oh yeah, that was completely worthless nothing. It was meaningless. Most of that was not, it was barely even character building. And so you've had all of these different characters, major and minor, sort of shuffling around, doing silly things, to the point where I almost wonder if some substantial amount of it was ad-libbed. To add insult to injury, it is bookended and occasionally interrupted in the middle by narration done seemingly ex post facto by Christian Bale's character, where he's like talking about either what's happening or what's on the screen. Sometimes it's in the form of like a very formal narrator. Sometimes it's in the form of like his internal monologue at the time. And it's just very distracting and makes the whole thing feel like they shot a bunch of shit and then tried to find the movie in the edit. It's really a shame, because I think this could actually be tightened up substantially. If you could cut 30 minutes off of this film, probably, and have a really well, you'd have to shoot some new stuff and rewrite the script substantially, but there's an interesting narrative in here about America in the post World War One period, and the sort of the fiction of the social and political landscape as it was presented, to the GIs and to the American people, and the problems, the socioeconomic problems that were happening, in the post-war period, with the Great Depression and all of the things that were around that. And there's an interesting film here, or at least somewhat interesting, because that gets to one of my other problems, which is the later part of the film is both a very close historical fiction, to the point where at the very end during the credits they actually run like a couple of like moments where they're like, oh look, it's our scene in the film, and then the like real world scene that happened, that this actually happened for real. And if there are a couple of plot lines in the movie that, if you are pretty familiar with various eras of American history, you may already be familiar with some of these events, or some of the people who are then not being, it's not the person, like the movie doesn't do, it's not supposed to be like a historical movie, and they don't use the names of the people who are involved in the events that they are then using as set pieces. And so it's just very confusing what the intention was when it comes to the historicity of the event. And that's made all the more awkward because the closer you get to the end, the more you get this feeling of, I hesitate to say preachiness, but a politically and socially it's really pointing towards parallels between events and actions that happened between, the end of World War One and the beginning of World War Two, and current events. And it's not that overt, but not that subtle, because it's not that well executed in the first place. So it's not hammering you over the head with the look at the historical parallels, but it's also not a very smart script. So it's just sort of tossing out its message right on the table, and it's not pointing at it, but it's very apparent. It's sort of like giving you the eye of like, look what I gave you. Look what it is. And you're like, yep, I got it. Awkward thumbs up. But it never ever tightens up or says anything interesting, or really tries to say much more than look at historical parallels. So it's just this mess of good performances, bad writing, mismatched tone. The cinematography is pretty ugly throughout. Like, it's very clear. Some people put in a lot of effort here because it is a historical piece. Like, obviously they're doing their best to be somewhat accurate and use their sets and makeup and all these different props and the costumes to both make a visually interesting movie, as well as using them for narrative purposes. But the actual production is pretty ugly. And it really wavers all over the place. Especially in the first half of the film, there's a lot more stuff that looks like wannabe, like some of it is like wannabe Wes Anderson. Some of it is just like weird artsy shots cut together in ways that are supposed to be artsy. Like I really can't be more specific than that. It looks like the work of a film studies student, like a film, you know, an undergrad college film student who like watched a bunch of Wes Anderson, then got into this like French New Wave and maybe a little of German Expressionism, and then was like, I'm gonna do all of them, but doesn't execute on any of them very interestingly or well. And like, so you can see that somebody made an effort and had some knowledge, but visually it's just not very appealing. The lighting is weird, framing is weird, editing is trying too hard. I mean, even the effects they used when they do time jumps or flashbacks or things like that are also bizarre. It's just an absolute mess. And ultimately, is so much less than some of its parts. Even the music, I feel bad for the people who produce the score, because the music's actually pretty interesting and well done. I have no idea who actually produced it, but like the music is having fun, and the movie can't decide whether it's trying to have fun or be very serious, be like borderline slapstick comedy and absurdist pastiche, or if it's like a deathly serious spy thriller. It's just completely baffling. I've heard good and bad about this film. There hasn't been very much buzz about it because apparently it performed really poorly. But it was easy to watch, and like I ended up seeing some ads run for it that like were just visually interesting enough where I'm like, the production value it looks like it might be good there. I'm kind of curious. I like period pieces, especially about eras that aren't that commonly covered. So this could be kind of fascinating, and ultimately it just delivers very little. It's a shame because I think there are some great performances in it, but it is mostly some talented people doing their best with some pretty low quality base content to work from. Anyway, this has been a very rambly one. I could talk more specifically about the actual the plot as it is structured. And I know I've talked about before, maybe going to a structure for these videos that has a sort of one part non-spoiler, one part full spoiler. If you get this far and haven't watched it, and you would like me to do those sorts of things, give me a heads up. Maybe I will go that direction with them at some point, but that requires me to take some more detailed notes and things. Yeah, this one's weird. If you have nothing better to do and it's easy for you to watch at no additional cost to yourself, sure, you could do worse. But it's not a very good movie overall. Anyway, thank you guys for watching yet another episode of Solipsist Watched. I've been your host, the Social Solipsist, and I'll see you guys next time.